All right, everyone. Instant reaction time. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Wednesday night. The saga is over. Oklahoma has got their quarterback for 2025. John Mateer, Washington State quarterback, announced his commitment. He's transferring to the Sooners. Long speculated, now official, as he's going to join Ben Arbuckle coming from Pullman to Norman. He was in town today. We waited around all day, everyone refreshing all day long, waiting for this thing to pop. And it finally did. I was in line to get a cheesesteak at the mall. Collin was on the radio. So not the most opportune time there, but we got it done. And we're sitting here, we're ready to talk about it. Collin, obviously a lot to digest. Even though we've been speculating about this for weeks and weeks. And, even just since Monday, since he hopped in the portal, there's been this kind of belief that this is how this was always going to go. Now that it's actually official, it's happened. John Mateer is an Oklahoma Sooner. Where does your mind go? What's the initial reaction for you as this is finally done and is really happening?
The great wait is over. You don't have to be miserable anymore. Oklahoma has its quarterback for the 2025 season ahead of a pivotal year in the SEC. John Mateer going to Norman is one of the biggest stories in all of college football. This is one of the best players in all of college football going to Oklahoma. We're talking about the guy who was number one in the nation in points responsible for this season, an electric playmaker through the air with his legs. Oklahoma had a serious need at the signal caller spot. And we talked about it. Like you mentioned, you can hire an offensive coordinator. You can hire some new offensive staffers. But if you don't have the guy back there to operate this thing efficiently, it doesn't really matter. John Mateer goes to Oklahoma, and with every snap, he will hold the fate of the program in his hands. Huge story across the college football landscape.
This was always Oklahoma's guy. We've talked about it a few times. They never really even pursued any other quarterbacks. I mean, no official offers sent out, no visits. I mean, this was always the way this felt like this was going to go. And like you said, this season, John Mateer with Ben Arbuckle, now, again, not in the SEC, is at Washington State, which was essentially a G5 team this year. But the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, this season completed just under 65% of his passes, 3,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 picks. And oh, by the way, he ran the ball with great success too, over 800 yards on the ground, another 15 touchdowns with his legs. I feel like that's kind of been an overlooked aspect of John Mateer's game. This guy was the number one rated player in the transfer portal from 24/7 Sports. Not quarterback, not best available or whatever, the number one player, period, that was out there to get in the portal. And Oklahoma got it done. They stepped up. There was a lot of talk, and we talked about in our board, Collin, you reported that Miami was going to be aggressive and try and maybe make something happen here. But Oklahoma stepped up and got this done without him leaving town, which was the worry, right? If he comes to Norman and leaves, that's not good. He didn't leave, right? He came to Norman, and they got it done. He's a Sooner. Talk about, from your perspective, just the circus of the last couple of days. And Oklahoma, again, stepping up and getting this thing done after he hopped in the portal officially on Monday.
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, this was kind of the foregone conclusion for weeks. This was at very least the assumption how this was going to go. Now, was the Miami interest real? Absolutely. I had been told even before Mateer put out publicly that he was going to go enter the transfer portal, that Miami was starting to put its effort together to try and counteract what OU had already kind of put together itself. And so, like you kind of mentioned, whenever we found out that John Mateer was going to get to Oklahoma in the middle of this week, you thought it was going to get done during this time. But the big holdup was if he does leave Norman uncommitted or unsigned.
Who knows? Right. Yeah.
Endless possibilities from there. Right. And so I'm very interested as far as some of the stuff that we're going to hear about how the process kind of shook out. I'm sure we'll never have a ton of true clarity about the situation. Right. But yeah, man, this is a huge deal for Oklahoma because you had it in place for a very long time. Like, this was essentially the backdoor deal we thought was going to kind of fall into place. And to now finally see it come together, especially when Miami and a few others wanted to get in there late.
Yeah.
It's a massive win for Brent Venables and Oklahoma staff.
Now, obviously, they're not done in the transfer portal by any means.
Right.
They picked up 2 wide receivers just today, and we'll talk about those guys more on the podcast later this week. But I want to ask you this, just in your estimation, in your opinion, how good does this make Oklahoma? Like, how good can this offense be? Obviously, you're bringing in Ben Arbuckle and tasking him with fixing an offense that was, again, a complete disaster this year. I don't need to beat that dead horse. We all know what it was this year. But you have got John Mateer, who was one of the best quarterbacks in the country this year, coming in, and he already knows Ben Arbuckle. He knows the system. He knows the offense. So you get that benefit. You don't have a quarterback that's having to learn the offense on the fly. He has to learn his teammates, but he's not having to learn the offense. You got Deion Burks back. We talked about that on Monday. Jaden Gibson's going to be back. Hopefully he can be what he was pre-injury. You've picked up a couple portal wideouts already. You've got Zion Kearney coming back. You probably need to look to make an addition in the tight end room, but you still have Devon Mitchell in the wings there. Your running back room, Taylor Tatum, Xavier Robinson are exciting young guys, and that's not even talking about Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk and what their futures may hold. Offensive line, you're hoping to add a couple portal bodies, but it played better down the stretch of this past season. Can this offense I guess just where you kind of at with this offense? I mean, it feels like the pieces are kind of starting to fall together. This team could make a pretty huge jump. And again, you're coming from a low point, but it feels like the offense has got a chance here to be something significant, to go with the defense, which is obviously getting better and better each year under Brent Venables.
Yeah. So as I gather myself here, because I think we're all a little frazzled, it's
hectic.
There's so much going on right now, but this was really the point that I wanted to be sure I got across to Oklahoma fans. You never want to try and equate a player's impact to an exact value. But Josh, we're talking about a guy who, number one, averaged 22.3 points per game contributed by himself. 22 points plus from this one player per game on average. I mean, that's a heck of a statistic to think about when you consider the offensive improvement that needs to take place in Norman. I'm not saying 22 plus points per game are coming to Oklahoma today.
Sure.
But that feels like a very significant number when you consider the current context of OU's group. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, man, John Mateer was the backup to Cam Ward, who he himself became one of the best players in all of college football at Washington State before going to Miami.
Sure.
But when Cam Ward left Washington State, this Wazoo offense was still a machine with him at the helm. When Mateer took over, Josh, this to me was an eye-popping stat. Washington State with Mateer at the helm actually went from number 38 in scoring offense with Cam Ward to number 11 in scoring offense with Mateer at the quarterback spot. Again, with Cam Ward being the guy who had Washington State in the top 40, Mateer almost got them into the top 10.
Right.
And what arguably matters most, are you scoring points? And
Cam Ward, who was a Heisman finalist this year and is going to be a top 5 pick in the draft, probably.
This guy is tied for 5th in passing touchdowns. He's 5th in total offense, 7th in yards per pass attempt, 8th in passing efficiency, 11th in passing yards per completion, 16th in total passing yards. The list goes on and on. And by the way, he is a dynamic runner of the ball with his legs. The list goes on and on here. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, this player makes Oklahoma markedly better today. And then you think about how OU is trying to tool this offense around him. A couple of transfer portal receivers in. They get Luke Peklenko on the offensive line, and I don't think that they're done up front either. And the other pieces that you have in place already, who you brought up. Mateer, there will be varying opinions out there, but I cannot stress this enough. This is one of the best players in college football. And you cannot truly quantify how good he is and how much better he can make Oklahoma. But some of these stats at least give you some sort of inclination what he could accomplish in his time at OU.
And I'll state the obvious too. He's got a personality that I think those fans are gonna get on board with pretty quick. Now, obviously, I've never talked to John. I haven't met him. Look forward to that opportunity. But watching him at Washington State this year and just going off what others have said about him, those that have covered him both at Washington State or nationally or whatever, he's got that kind of that moxie, that edge that OU fans tend to gravitate toward. And that's going to be fun to watch. I think this is a guy that obviously you have to play well. That's where it all starts. But if he plays well and helps resurrect this OU offense, which was, what it was this year, you're talking about a very popular guy in Norman pretty quick. And it's exciting. It's very exciting. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but I want to also ask you, the recruiting impact of this in terms of the portal. I mean, they've gotten 2 receivers today. Got Luke Beklenko on Monday. We talked about that on the Monday podcast. It feels like this has the chance to open the floodgates for you a bit, right? I mean, you've got the big name quarterback in town now. Like, is this the key that unlocks everything for OU in the portal? Is that overstating it? What's kind of your estimation of the portal impact now that they have John Mateer, their quarterback, on board?
Yeah, I think Oklahoma intentionally brought a lot of receivers to campus, knowing John Mateer was going to be arriving Tuesday night and be around on Wednesday. They have already added an offensive lineman, a couple of receivers. So obviously don't want to take away from those players. But I think, number one, those guys probably joined Oklahoma, you have to assume, knowing that, hey,
sure,
the pitch was, we're going to get a really darn good quarterback here pretty soon. Just give us some time. And then number two, the guys that will now reevaluate Oklahoma because of John Mateer's commitment. I mean, this is a pretty altering of the process type of commitment in the grand scheme of the transfer portal. You have receivers on campus. You're expecting an offensive lineman of the highest caliber to visit later this week. You've got a few more other guys kind of in that rotation, mapping out visits. And then beyond the offensive side of the ball, because like we mentioned, they have a couple receivers, offensive linemen. They're going after a few more guys at those positions and a tight end or two. When you have your quarterback, guys now on the defensive side of the ball can say, okay, they've got a plan. They've got a plan over there. And I think that not only applies to guys that are in the portal, but I also think this is kind of noteworthy. Oklahoma has been battling the portal with its own roster. That defense was wildly effective this season. But as we know, there are guys like Dominic Williams who still need to make a decision. Jaden Jackson, like, you want to make sure guys like Jaden Jackson and David Stone, not saying there's any buzz there, but that young guys in your program with a high level of talent know you are committed to winning games, and there's going to be a vision for success on the field in Norman. This kind of reinvigorates the faith that a lot of those players have in the plan at Oklahoma, right? And now you kind of overview not only what this offense could be with John Mateer, but almost exactly what I'm sure those defensive players are saying. You look at that defense with a quarterback of this caliber, this is now a completely different look of an OU football team, and that applies to guys outside of the program and in-house as well.
Last thing I want to ask you before we wrap this up, the Michael Hawkins aspect of this, because that's the other elephant in the room here with this, is that Michael Hawkins is still here. And, we talked to Mike last week, and he put it very, admirably then. Look, he was not naive to the fact that we're going to bring in other quarterbacks. He said he had no plans to leave. He wants to be at Oklahoma. He plans to compete for the job. Obviously, it's very hard to imagine John Mateer not being the starting quarterback of this team moving to next year. What is your sense of the Michael Hawkins aspect of this? I mean, look, from my perspective, Michael Hawkins has played 1 year, right? I mean, he's a young guy. It's not like the clock's ticking on him yet. He's got a lot of career in front of him. If John Mateer comes in and has the year that he's going to hope for, he can probably, consider moving on. And then the door is open for you at that point, I would think, for Michael Hawkins going into year 3. But is he willing to wait that long? That's the question only he can answer. What's your kind of sense of Michael Hawkins' aspect in Oklahoma's belief, I guess, that Michael Hawkins is going to stick around and be the backup this year, and then maybe still the guy down the road. I guess just that's the other angle to this, that you don't want to diminish Michael Hawkins, and a little bit he did in the time he got to play this year, but at the same time, John Mateer is being brought in to be the guy. So that's a delicate situation.
I think if you're Michael Hawkins, number one, you've taken an appropriate approach to all of this up until this point. I think you have to commend Michael Hawkins for the way he has handled everything and the outside noise that is going to bleed into a position room like the quarterback spot where there's only one guy. I think Michael Hawkins has a very mature understanding and a high level of awareness of what this game entails and what that position kind of brings with it. I think it helps him a ton that he has a father who played in the NFL, the not for long league, and he has someone who can mentor him through this kind of process. Yeah. And I think if you're Michael Hawkins, do you want to be the starting quarterback? Absolutely. Are you going to go in to the spring and fall camp competing to try and take that spot?
Make it awkward. Sure. Make it hard on them. Yeah.
Make people sweat, man. That's well within your right. But at the same time, you should also be excited, if you're Michael Hawkins, to learn from a player like John Mateer, who, when you look at what the best case scenario would be for someone like Michael Hawkins, it probably looks a lot like what John Mateer brings to the table, right?
Yeah.
Not just as a passer, but we talked about John Mateer's effectiveness as a runner of the ball. We know that Michael Hawkins has a chance to develop into a lethal dual threat quarterback, and that's what John Mateer is. And so if you're Michael Hawkins, again, you're not giving up the fight. You're a quarterback at the end of the day who will get some snaps, and you're going to have a chance to continue to kind of draw some eyes your direction. But I think there's a ton of value here for Michael Hawkins through John Mateer, because that mentorship, that further developmental time, and then learning from him within this system, the long-term impact and implications this could have for the career of Michael Hawkins, it's just another way that John Mateer to Oklahoma could benefit the program.
I agree. And I don't think the door is closed on Michael Hawkins being the Oklahoma quarterback at some point. I mean, whether, again, he's
absolutely
trying to compete and you make it awkward this year, you make the decision tough. That's your goal of spring and next fall. But even after this season, again, if John Mateer has the year that he wants, he's probably going to move on to the next level. If he doesn't have the year that he wants, that job might be open again for you to possibly make a run at. So if you're Hawkins, not that he's looking for me to give him advice, but you stay the course. You stay the course. And
absolutely,
for all the tea leaves certainly seem to suggest that that's what he's going to do. And he's handled it as well as you could possibly expect of a young guy. And we'll see. But that's the other angle of it. Any other final thoughts? Obviously, we have a lot more time to digest. We'll have the actual podcast, me and you, either tomorrow or Friday. We gotta figure it out. There's a lot more portal stuff going on. But any final thoughts here is it just feels good that this is done. I mean, for us, I'm certain for OU fans who have been sweating about this, but it's done. John Mateer's coming. He's going to be on the Sooners next year. I'm fired up to get to talk to him and see him this spring. But any last thoughts for you on this as Oklahoma gets their guy?
Yeah, I'm just so glad it's over, and I am glad for everyone out there that it's over. I fully acknowledge this was probably one of my worst podcasts in a long time, just because I am physically and mentally exhausted, and I can't imagine what it's been like for the folks out there, especially the folks in the program, man. I think the last thing that I want to say, my almost last take, commend Brent Venables, commend Ben Arbuckle. I know they hired, I haven't been able to nail his name yet, but John Kusecki, who came over from Washington State, the quarterback's coach, who's now a senior offensive analyst for OU. They get it done. One Oklahoma, the NIL collective, and the people who got this funding and money together, give them a ton of props. They deserve it. I know how much effort went into getting the proper package together for, like you mentioned, the number one player in the portal. OU had to get its guy for 2025. This was the definition of a group effort. And I think the Oklahoma fan base has a lot to be proud of, specifically about their staff and the collective that's operating behind the scenes.
Oklahoma stepped up and got it done. You know, that's the best way to put it. I mean, this was their guy. This was going to be what they needed to do, and they did it. John Mateer, Oklahoma Sooner. Feels pretty good.
Let's go take a nap, folks. Let's go get some rest.
There's more portal movement coming, I'm sure, but the big fish is in with John Mateer. Keep up with the Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma247sports.com. Collin's had tons of VIP intel. If you've been with us at Sooners Illustrated this week, we've been providing that confidence that this was going to be okay, that John Mateer was going to be a Sooner, and he is. Much more portal movement to come. You figure, again, that this might be the piece that unlocks some more chess pieces. We'll be there to talk about it and bring it to you throughout every step of the way over Sooners Illustrated. Keep up for the podcast as well. We might wait till Friday. Keep an eye out Thursday or Friday, one or the other. Colin and I got to figure it all out as we figure that out. But look for the show later this week. We'll kind of dive into some more ripple effects of this and some of the other portal additions they've already made this week with a couple wide receivers just today. So keep an eye out for all that over at Sooners Illustrated. That's it for now. John Mateer, a Sooner. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway signing off for now. We'll see you next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated YouTube channel.